What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. So in today's video we're going to be talking about cholesterol, and we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible. We're going to keep this nice and informal as well. Guys, I'm not an expert, but I'm just going to share what I've learned. The whole topic is cholesterol. We're going to make it, like I said, a very beginner layman's terms, in other words, very just simple. And we're going to be focused on, should you be worried to eat too much cholesterol, or should you be worried about high cholesterol in your blood? Why even discuss this topic? So let me take a sip of the coffee. Feel free, guys, of course, to have a read on each of these slides as far as what I post. But in essence, I have something called psoriasis. It's an autoimmune condition. It's where you have really flaky skin. It basically looks like your skin, when you itch it, it's snowing, no matter the time of year. Guys, it tends to get worse, I find, in the winter, ironically. It's because you get less sunlight, you get less exposure of the sun to your area of psoriasis, and in general, you tend to be more covered up in the winter, hence you don't get as much exposure to the areas that have psoriasis. Anyways, and I mostly have it in my scalp and my shins, and it's starting to spread as well. So long story short, basically, I learned that these carnivore diets and these animal-based diets that focus on whole, unprocessed foods, but not just that. It's no flour, no grains. Of course, if it's animal-based and it has fruit and honey, you're not eating a ton of like starches. You are eating carbs though, because you're getting the carbs from fruit and honey. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing an animal-based diet. And with increasing your red meat, you're going to notice that your cholesterol does increase quite a bit, because you're increasing your dietary cholesterol intake, and also you're increasing your saturated fat intake. And when you increase your saturated fat intake, your cholesterol ultimately increases as well. And with that, people always say, oh, what about your cholesterol? What about your heart? So my big question is, do cardiovascular risks actually increase with increased cholesterol, like having high cholesterol in the blood? And I really want to know this, because if the diet works to cure psoriasis, which I've done for about like a month now, just over a month, and I have seen definitely improvements in my skin, guys. A weird little thing is I started getting worried when I started to get the psoriasis on my eyelid, because I was wondering, like, if the skin degrades that covers my eye, that potentially could cause like issues with my sight in the future. So like that's when I really started to take this seriously, and I was trying to figure out natural ways of trying to eliminate my psoriasis. And guys, that has pretty much almost fully gone away, and it's been about a month, and it was getting pretty bad. So I've definitely seen results. And if I'm seeing results with the main thing that I was going after, then I'm going to probably want to do this long term. So my question is this, sorry, I accidentally skipped on the last slide, but my question is this diet safe to use long term? Now, just a forewarning, I'm not a doctor, but to become a doctor, basically, guys, you are doing a lot of self-study, and you also listen to what other people tell you in your lectures. And you got to wonder who even told them that in the first place. Where did they learn their information? Because you could be in the other shoes where you're giving the information, and then people would be like, where'd you even learn this information anyways that you call your knowledge? Basically, you don't need a degree to make you an expert in the subject. Like, you don't need a nutrition degree to give nutrition advice. And this is really important, guys, because a credential doesn't mean that you know what you're saying, but it also doesn't mean that you don't. What makes sense is if people are being correct about things. And you got to do your own research, guys, because you got to keep in mind that people are going to be telling you things that they know. And it's okay to question things. Just because the majority does things a certain way doesn't mean that you also have to do things a certain way, because the majority of people don't live a life that they actually want. They don't get results that they want. So if the majority are doing something, then you should probably do something different to get different results if you don't want the same old results. You can study the same information that these people would study. You can do the same research that they do when they're training to come to the same conclusions. So you don't need to rely on a quote-unquote expert. And remember, there are people just like you that went to school and had to study this information on their own and come up with the same conclusions. Guys, I'm just sharing what I learned from my research and what I recommend and what I do myself. Most importantly, more so what I do myself, not so much what I recommend, but you can definitely take this as anecdotal advice if you want and use it on your own self. But you guys should think about what you want to do for yourself in this matter of questioning things and asking yourself, should I listen to other people or should I actually put some more thought into things? So what is cholesterol? Basically, it's a lipid, and just to give you guys an idea, fats are a part of the lipid group, so it's a very vast group. And the cholesterol is also a part of the subgroup. It's a subgroup of the steroid family, and basically every cell in our body produces it, but most of the production comes by our liver. And if you increase more dietary cholesterol, your liver is going to produce less, and vice versa. And so that brings in the whole debate, is there such a thing as high cholesterol? Because obviously if we're going to eat excessive cholesterol, our liver can produce less, but then our ceiling for cholesterol intake could technically be as high as we want it to be. So is there a natural cap? Like, should we cap off at a certain number? And long story short, like, obviously it always, no matter what, even healthy foods, guys, everything comes down to moderation. Just like how exercising is good for you, too much exercise will break down your body and cause you injury. So even something like being healthy and moving around can be bad for you in excess. So you got to keep in mind, literally everything needs to be moderated in your life. And sometimes there's seasons where you got to do more of it and less of it. And that's just, it really depends on what you're doing. And that's really just a gray area. But even like, say, working in life, guys, like you can do a ton of work for a season to get something going, but once it's built, then eventually you got to pull back, because if you don't pull back, then you're going to feel burnt out. So you need to have balance no matter what you do in life. So cholesterol is actually, it's very important, guys. It has a lot of functions, but it basically stabilizes all of our cell membranes. It also is a part of the neuronal sheath, the myelin sheath that wraps around our neurons, the things that send information, electrical signals to our brain and spinal cord and throughout our spinal cord, and just the communication within our nervous system to our brain. The sheaths that wrap and protect those nerves are all coated partially with cholesterol, so that's very important. But even just providing membrane stability, it also provides at the same time, paradoxically, a fluidity. And that's because of the nature of things being hydrophobic versus hydrophilic. So either water repelling or water attracting. So obviously fat doesn't dissolve in water. That's why when you get oil mixed into water, you see the little droplets on the top. So there's other fat soluble things in our body and fats as well. And they need to be transported with things that are more agreeable with them, so to speak. So you allow things to enter and exit the cell basically with this cholesterol channel. So very important. It allows for different genes to be encoded, and it allows for a lot of production of steroid hormones. And we're not just talking about like making the gains, testosterone, but also different steroid hormones that are responsible for regulating carbohydrates, sodium, and of course your sex hormones such as testosterone and estrogen, and also the regulation of your bone homeostasis, which is just the breakdown and the rebuilding of bones, because we have this cycle where we break down some of the calcium off of our bones and then use that when we have low calcium in the blood, and then we also use excessive calcium to rebuild our bones, and it's all a cycle, breaking down and repairing. As you guys probably know, for everything there's always a breakdown and repair cycle. So these are all seemingly important things is what I'm trying to get at, like, wouldn't you guys say? So what about the negative of cholesterol? So according to the previous slide, too little of cholesterol would not allow us to produce the things that we want to produce in the previous slide. So then you would start to think, is there a problem when we take statins? So statins, if you guys don't know, they are drugs that reduce our cholesterol. Granted that our dietary consumption is also decreased in conjunction, which it still will lower the dietary cholesterol as well. Our body, if the statin lowers our body's production and we lower our dietary cholesterol, we're going to have overall low cholesterol. So then you start to wonder, like, is that a problem? Because remember, if we consume too little of cholesterol, our body starts to make cholesterol because it seems like we need it, right? But then an excess of cholesterol has been shown to cause a buildup of plaque in the arteries called atherosclerosis, which can cause heart attacks, stroke, and aneurysms, which of course are very negative things. Nobody wants those. So it's a very serious topic, right? Like too little, and your body can't function. Like every cell has cholesterol, and too much, and you're going to have a heart attack. Like that's pretty big. We should probably think about this. All right, so I have thought about it. So cholesterol, basically, guys, It is very tightly regulated within our body, and it's transported by means of many different lipoproteins. Now, these lipoproteins are basically lipid proteins, so they're a mixture of lipids and proteins, and they carry lipids, right? So they're a lipoprotein. They're a mixture of those two. Think of them as basically carriers, or a lot of people in the fitness space kind of call it boats. So they're doing a job which is to carry different lipids, and it's mainly triglycerides and cholesterol. I have it all written down here, so I'm not going to read it. You guys can read that. But basically, you have different versions of these boats, and the more triglycerides that they carry, the less dense they are. And the more cholesterol they carry, the more dense they are, because the particles are just more dense. And just for abbreviations, when you see a little c next to the carrier, whether it's LDL or HDL, it's referring to the cholesterol amount. And when you see a p, it's referring to the particle amount. All right, so now that we got some terminology, we can keep going. Okay, so I had a weird glitch where this slide didn't save, so I'm just re-recording this. You guys wouldn't really have known that anyways, but I'm just telling you. So basically, the pathway is that dietary cholesterol plus whatever you produce in your body gets packaged into the liver into particles called the very low-density lipoproteins. Your body is then going to use the triglycerides that are found in the VLDL for energy, and then the VLDL is converted into LDL. Your body then uses LDL cholesterol for its functions, and then that excess cholesterol is then packaged into HDL and sent back to the liver. The liver will then process some of that cholesterol and send it to the gut to be used in the production of bile acids to digest our food. Something that we have to keep in mind is that LDL particles are also recycled. Cholesterol is very expensive, guys, in our body. We use it for so much stuff. And it's in every cell, right? Every cell needs it and whatever. So it's very expensive. So it's obviously very important. So that's why I'm doing this topic. It's very worthwhile considering the role that cholesterol has within our body. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind, and we're going to talk about this later, is that your body does not recycle oxidized LDL particles. It only recycles healthy LDL particles. So you start to run into issues when your LDL becomes damaged. So let's keep a move on here. So what happens when things go wrong? So basically, the biggest things that go wrong is when you consume a lot of processed foods that have a lot of chemicals, a lot of processed sugars, and like excessive processed sugars, because processed sugars are not necessarily the worst thing. It's just when you consume them in excess. And of course, they're not very good, because back in history, we would never have access to sugars that are separated from the actual compound of whatever it's coming from, whether it's sugar cane or sugar beet or whatever it is, guys. We wouldn't be able to consume so much sugar as we are when we have the processed sugar, because otherwise we'd have to eat so much sugar cane to get the amount of sugar that you would add to your diet if you were adding sugar to your, a bunch of your foods, to your coffee, whatever. So you do end up getting a lot of issues from this. And basically insulin resistance, which all this stuff is kind of tied together, especially the sugars and insulin resistance. So what ends up happening is, I found in my research, is that your LDL particles, also called the LDLP, are going to get oxidized by situations where there's excessive sugars, and you will get excessive sugars when you eat excessive sugars and also have insulin resistance. Therefore, you can't bring down your blood sugar. And when you consume a lot of processed foods that destroy your gut and destroy your insulin response. So now you have this excessive sugar, which changes your LDL into small LDL. And these are the oxidized or damaged LDL. Your body's not able to recycle the small LDL, but it can recycle the regular LDL. But then there's still an issue, because you still have these oxidized particles floating around and you can't get rid of them. And so you may think, oh, we can lower our cholesterol with statins. Now, statins do not recycle these small LDL oxidized particles either, but instead they reduce your healthy LDL. So you're still reducing overall LDL and potentially some of the cholesterol that's left over in the LDL, but you still have these other particles that are hanging around. So what ends up happening, guys, is these particles are damaged, and they leak into, because they have a different chemical composition, they have a different ability to get into places where they shouldn't, and they basically get in between your endothelial membrane, and then they get engulfed by a macrophage and they form something called a foam cell, and this results in inflammation, and ultimately you get a bunch of stuff that enters the area, and instead of having like a round circular tube, you start to get this ridge that forms. It's kind of hard for me to show, but basically instead of having like a circle, you start to get this little buildup that starts to form in the artery, and what ends up happening is that's the plaque, and you get just a bunch of stuff that blocks up the inner diameter or the inner lumen, the inside of the artery, and it decreases blood flow. And depending on where that decrease in blood flow is, as you guys know, lack of blood flow to the heart and your coronary arteries leads to a heart attack. Lack of blood flow to the brain causes strokes. A buildup of plaque can also increase the pressure in the arteries, potentially causing an aneurysm, which is basically a branch off, basically a little, almost like a little bulb, like a little zit off of the arterial wall. And that results because of the high pressure kind of making that tissue layer kind of bud off because it's kind of pushing it off. And then eventually those can rupture and cause hemorrhaging, which can cause like a lot of issues because then you have blood in areas that it shouldn't be, and also blood is leaking, so blood's not going to areas that it should go to. So it really depends on where the effects of this atherosclerosis is. That depends on what kind of effects that occur within your body. So big problems. The other things that you have to consider are that if you get endothelial injuries, I think that some regular LDL particles and cholesterol can potentially sit in your arteries, because I don't know if it's all oxidized LDL that sits in your and the cholesterol that's found in the oxidized LDL that sits in your arteries, but you would have to assume that some of the healthy stuff does sit there, but it's sitting there because you have an endothelial injury, and typically you should be able to repair your arteries if they do have an injury. But if you have some sort of impaired wound healing, which you tend to find in people that are pre-diabetic because of issues with insulin and just high blood sugar and a lot of inflammatory markers being there in the blood. And cholesterol, being a nice guy, is what I'm kind of determining from research, just kind of shows up to the scene and kind of repairs things. But then they become an issue because now they're causing the atherosclerosis, but they're also, in a sense, blocking off you from getting like hemorrhaging in your arteries because they're repairing a blood vessel and basically plugging it off. So they're going to plug it off, but they're going to increase your blood pressure, potentially causing other issues, and then eventually that blocks off your arteries and then it decreases your blood flow. But it's basically like you'd probably die before with hemorrhaging than you would with atherosclerosis. So your cholesterol is almost coming to save the day, the healthy stuff in a sense, right? So things like high blood pressure, diabetes, and stuff like that are all things that could cause issues with you if you have normal cholesterol and normal LDL, because they're damaging your arteries, and then the normal LDL and the normal cholesterol will try to fix your arteries. So basically, we worry about the excessive cholesterol when you're having issues with blood pressure, your blood sugar, your insulin. But in the absence of these issues, the lipoproteins are simply just doing a job, and that is to carry cholesterol. So then, let's answer the question. Let's not beat around the bush. Sorry guys, it's a bit early here. I'm just trying to drink my coffee and wake up. But we got to get this video out. So is high cholesterol a problem? Okay, so it seems that high cholesterol isn't an issue as long as the carriers are healthy. If you have proper blood pressure and insulin sensitivity and you're healthy, then you produce and recycle cholesterol and lipoproteins safely. If you're insulin resistant or have other damaging factors to your vascular system leading to endothelial injuries, which is just the inner lining of the arterial wall, then the small LDL and cholesterol can potentially become an issue as well, on top of your damaged LDL, which will happen if you are unhealthy as well. You will have more of those actually in your blood as well. Now, this is where a statin could actually become beneficial until somebody fixes their insulin problem. So it's not necessarily bad. It just depends on the situation. And just a little side fact for you guys, saturated fats, so animal fats that you would get in like your steaks, typically increase your LDL cholesterol, sometimes your LDL particles, and we'll kind of talk about that in a second. But seed oils will increase your small LDL because they are basically a bunch of highly processed, damaged oils that can then cause damage to your normal homeostasis of your cholesterol mechanisms. Some things to keep in mind here, guys, are that if you are somebody that is unhealthy, you need to first get healthy, and therefore you might need to use a statin until you fix your insulin problem. And you can know this by checking your blood work and checking what your fasting glucose is and your fasting insulin. And you want to make sure that those numbers get into a healthy range, and then you can potentially be okay having higher cholesterol. Because remember, higher cholesterol is not necessarily a bad thing, and it depends on the health of the individual. Now, with that said, I will put a caveat that I want to say that it doesn't mean you should be eating 10 to 20 eggs a day, a ton of animal fat every single day. Do I think that stuff is healthy for you? Yes, I do think it's healthy for you, but I also know that anything in excess is good for nothing. If you eat too much healthy food, guys, you can get overweight. Being overweight can lead to health issues. So this extra healthy food without moving can make you unhealthy. Too much exercise without eating enough food can make you unhealthy. Too much exercise can also lead to injuries because you're not recovering. Too much of anything, even though it's good for you, is bad. Too much time spending with family is bad because you're neglecting other areas of your life that you could be doing to make your family life better. If you never go to work and you just want to spend time with your family all the time, then you don't make enough money, and then you can't provide for your family, and then your family suffers, and then you can't do anything with your family. You see what I'm saying? Like, there are things that are good, but you have to use some common sense, and that's really what I want to get across here. But in terms of just quickly recapping, just answering the question, is high cholesterol a problem? No, it's not, with the caveat of you're not having a crazy boatload of cholesterol. And as long as you're healthy in terms of your insulin and your blood sugar and like your things like your blood pressure, if you're healthy, it's not a problem to have quote unquote high cholesterol that people call high cholesterol. But if you're moderating your diet and not eating too much meat and too much saturated fat, then your cholesterol will not be excessively sky high to the point where you would have to potentially start worrying about it becoming a problem. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's the answer to the question. No, not if you're healthy, with the caveat of some common sense within moderation of what is the ceiling of high cholesterol. All right, so guys, what I would recommend is doing some blood work, and I do plan to do this in the future. I want to look at my fasting insulin, glucose. I want to look at a full lipid profile and kind of go through and just kind of understand the numbers and understand the ranges and understand how they all interplay with each other, because there is some nuance with it. I did watch a video, thankfully, that explained everything, so I want to go through that later in life. Just to kind of show you guys an example of how things can get complicated is if you go on an animal-based diet, you're going to get an increase in LDL-C because you're consuming more cholesterol that therefore needs to get to the cells. But keep in mind that if you don't use up that excessive cholesterol, some of it will get recycled and some of it will get, or a lot of it will get recycled back to the intestines where you use it to break down your food. And then if you don't consume that, you're just going to excrete it. But something like LDL-P may actually go down. You're like, how does that even work? If you get more cholesterol, don't you need more carriers? Now, when you look at LDL particles, there's a difference between your LDL healthy particles and your small LDL particles. So if you get a decrease in your small LDL particles, so your bad LDL particles, then your LDL overall, because it encompasses the healthy and the unhealthy particles, will actually go down, but your healthy LDL-P remained. So you have sufficient carriers for your increase in cholesterol, but you don't have the extra bad stuff, so your overall particle count went down. It's very complex, but again, if you're using common sense, you're eating healthy and you're eating whole foods, you're probably okay. And if your doctor, everything, all your blood work looks good and your fasting insulin and your glucose looks good and you're healthy and your doctor tells you to take a statin, then you could probably tell them to go kick rocks because, again, they're just giving you advice that they know. They probably haven't even thought about nutrition that much, guys. Honestly, they probably haven't really thought about it that much at all. And at the end of the day, you can't blame anybody for telling you to do something and for making you do something, because you have full autonomy over your body, unless you're a slave, which hopefully you're not. You have the freedom of choice. You have the freedom of education. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to. So it's up to you to decide. All this to say that you could be in the hands of somebody else's knowledge and decision making if you don't put yourself in your own hands. If you give the power to somebody else, then you give them the power to make you a victim. If you don't relinquish your power to other people, then you do not give them the power to make you a victim. Instead, mistakes are not looked at as failures and as opportunities to blame people, but they're looked at as opportunities to learn. Guys, nobody is perfect. You feel like you should be able to trust your doctors because, you know, they're your doctor. But they are teaching you something that somebody else taught them, and maybe they're correct and maybe they're wrong, because science changes and we learn. Nobody is perfect. Don't blame anybody. Just be informed and make the decision for yourself. Again, use common sense, do a lot of research. I hope this video helped you guys out. If it did, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. Leave some comments, guys, and let me know what you think about this topic. I am completely open to also learning new things about this topic. I don't claim to know everything. Guys, share this with a friend if you think it'd be beneficial, and catch me for another video on this channel. Hope you guys enjoyed. Once again, take care. Peace.